Hi, it's great to be here today. I'm going to be talking to you about a project that I started about 8 years ago called Forests on the Edge. And I'll be telling you a little bit about why we initiated this project. I'll give you some examples of some of the analyses we've conducted and the reports that we've produced, and tell you a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned along the way. There are about 300 million hectares of forest in the United States. And what a lot of the American public does not realize is that over 60% of this forest is owned by private individuals and corporations. It's not public, it's not owned by the government, and there is very little government regulation of what happens on these forests relative to government forests. Who's owning these forests? Well, about 25% of the private forest land is in very large parcels. I apologize for the acreage figures here, but so the large parcels are approximately 2,500 hectares or larger. Most of those are owned by large timber corporations, and most of these lands have been sold over the past 10 years to shorter-term private investment organizations. The remainder of the land is divided into parcels of about 2,500 acres, or excuse me, hectares or fewer, and most of these lands are owned by families who may harvest them for, or manage them for timber, or may not. They may manage them for nothing. They may just enjoy having a forest. Over 25% of America's water is actually filtered by these private forests, so they're incredibly important from that perspective as well as others. 92% of all of the timber harvested in the United States comes from private forests, and over 60% of all at-risk plants and animals in the United States are associated with these private lands, so they're incredibly important. And unfortunately, they are under tremendous development pressures, housing development pressures, and this includes areas around our cities as well as areas adjacent to our public lands that are protected from development. And it's becoming more and more easy to live in rural areas, work in rural areas. There are a lot of people retiring, the baby boomers as we call them, are retiring and moving to rural areas, and that is resulting in a lot of the land becoming fragmented and subdivided. And I forgot to mention that a large percentage of our private forest landowners are 60 years or older, and they are starting to leave their land to their children, who are in turn subdividing it. So I was really interested in seeing if I could find a way to communicate the message or the story that we had to tell about private forests to a larger audience, a larger amount of the American public. Because unlike a lot of countries, a lot of the decisions about where future housing will occur is made on a very local level by local towns and communities, and there is very little coordination across landscapes on where development will occur. So I started with one publication called Forests on the Edge, which was published about 7 years ago. We included a map showing where the private forests were and where they were projected to be developed in the future. And we were really surprised at how popular this publication was. It has lots of pictures. We explain in very simple language why forests are important, what are the services they provide, how these services are impacted by development, and we showed where they were more likely to be impacted by development. And we produced 5,000 copies, and within 3 years we had to reprint it so that we handed out 25,000 copies. And the maps were showing up in PowerPoints all over the place. We were just amazed. And so we realized there was a real need for this kind of information, particularly by conservation groups who were communicating with local government officials or our people on Congress that were making funding decisions. So we produced a series of reports, and I'm going to show you just a few of the analyses that we created for one of our most recent reports, which is called Private Forests, Public Benefits. So this is one of the maps that appears in that report, and what we did was we ranked watersheds, 4th level or 8-digit watersheds, across the country according to the percentage of private forest in each watershed to experience a substantial increase in housing density. And as you can see, perhaps from this map, there are some watersheds in which 75% of the private forest in that watershed will experience a substantial increase in housing density such that those forests will no longer be rural. They may be urban, they may be ex-urban, but they will no longer be rural. And so a lot of the benefits that they provide will be reduced. And so across the country, 29 million hectares of forest are projected to experience this change, and that's between 2000 and 2030. We also looked at whatever ecosystem benefits I could find GIS layers for. So I had to find nationally consistent GIS layers so that we could create consistent maps. So this is one looking at timber volume, ranking watersheds according to the amount of timber volume on private forest land. And so you can see the watersheds in the east have the highest amounts of timber volume. In fact, close to 90% of all of the private forest timber volume is located in the southeast, which is also an area of high population increase. So if you combine these two maps, you get this one, which shows where future increases in housing density are most likely to affect timber production, which you could say, that's great, fewer trees will be cut down. But it also means that less forest will be managed. There will be less likelihood of people being able to sell the timber from their land because it's not very profitable to go into small areas and harvest timber. And so there will be less incentive for these landowners to hold on to their land, is what we're thinking. I'm also going to show you an example of what we did with a layer that I was able to get from NatureServe on at-risk species associated with private forests. We actually got their at-risk species data and overlaid it with our data on private forest cover. And you can see that the highest numbers of at-risk species associated with private forests in the United States are in primarily the southeast, which is also the area of highest population growth, as well as some watersheds in California. And some of these watersheds contain up to 79 at-risk plant or animal species. Well, these are also some of the areas with the highest amount of housing growth, so you can see from the map on the right that where the greatest numbers of at-risk species could be affected by future housing growth. I'm going to just show you another example of what we did in this report, which was we found some threats layers and also combined them with our housing density layers, so you could see in which watersheds a threat, in addition to housing density increases, would be most likely to affect the health of our private forests. And so this shows wildfire, the potential for extreme wildfires. The potential for both is, again, highest in the southeast United States, as well as parts of California and some parts of the southwest. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've learned and give you some examples of how these reports have been used. One thing I've learned, as I mentioned, there is a huge demand for this kind of information written in a very simple, non-technical way, because it makes it very easy for conservation organizations and others to communicate our message. The data that we used has been used by all kinds of organizations. Universities have used it. Many state agencies have used this data, and I'll give you some examples. Last but not least, people get very excited about maps, and that can be a good thing, and it can also be a bad thing if the map doesn't say what somebody thinks it should. So it's really important to share. I found it's important for me to share our maps with people before I publish them, so I understand what people might be concerned about. I won't necessarily change the data, but I can at least address their concerns in our reports. How am I doing on time? 2 minutes, okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about the uses. The data and maps have appeared in newspapers across the country. The New York Times, the Washington Post, which is my local newspaper. The Associated Press has picked up some of our statistics and stories. Conservation organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, as well as some electronic media, have replicated or described some of our studies in their journals or newsletters, whatever. I'm going to skip that one. The state of Washington requested our data to do a similar analysis just for the state, so they could understand where in the state their state lands might be most likely to be changing due to development occurring adjacent to their lands. The Nature Conservancy has used the data for some strategic planning in Pennsylvania. These are just a few examples. I learned recently that some organizations in the Puget Sound in the state of Washington have been handing out our brochures or reports to local citizens attending meetings to create a process for visioning what the future should or could look like in their area, and they use the information as background material just to kind of explain the issues. Some universities, such as the University of Maine, have gotten funding for studies in some watersheds because their watershed showed up as red in one of our reports. And Portland, Maine, has used our reports as background material for redefining the technical standards that they use for planning future development in that area. So it's been really interesting just seeing all the different ways these reports and the data have been used. And I think I'll leave it at that, except to give you our website. You're welcome to come onto our website, order hard copies of our reports, or download. They're all available for download on our website. I also have an exhibit upstairs where I have a few reports, and I can also get names for people that want additional ones. And then lastly, I'd just like to say that I think you all have a story to tell. I think you're learning a lot just being out there in the field, and you probably have stories that other people would like to know. And whatever vehicle you can use to communicate them, whether it be writing results of what you're doing on a website or whatever, I think it's important that your stories be told, and I think they could make a difference. Thank you.